The media pounced using Chinese communist propaganda talking points. It was anti-Asian hate from Tom Cotton to do this, and he's pushing back now.
If it is confirmed that roads around that lab were shut down for a number of days in mid-October, it is highly coincidental that there was a major shutdown of those roads at about the time one might have expected this virus to first get transmitted to humans, whatever the origins may have been. But this would be another piece of circumstantial evidence that there was some kind of accident or outbreak from those labs, not from the seafood market or anywhere else. That's why it's so important we get to the bottom of this data.
Now, that was, and my mistake here, that was Cotton back in May 10th of 2020.
And that was Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton on this program in May of last year, addressing something that he picked up, that there was no cell phone activity or major road activity. They were all closed around the Wuhan lab of virology in October of 2019. This is a very busy area of Wuhan. To have no cell phone activity is a real red flag. Congressman Devin Nunes calls this shutdown exculpatory evidence in his new report on the origins of COVID-19. We told you about that report coming out. It was released this past Wednesday. Joining me right now is the first lawmaker to go on the record right here on this program back in February of 2020 and suggest that COVID-19 could have leaked from that Wuhan lab of virology. Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, you've done great value for our viewers by your honesty and telling it like it is. Thank you for that. Do you still stand by what you said, and what have you learned in the last year about this situation?
Yeah, Maria, it's hard to believe it's been 15 months since you and I first discussed what I think most Arkansans think is a very common sense proposition, that it surely is a big coincidence that this virus started not up in some remote mountain village with caves full of bats, but rather in downtown Wuhan, a city larger than New York, just a few blocks up the road from labs that was researching bat-based coronaviruses. And since then, every bit of circumstantial evidence, to include evidence that came out in the final days of the Trump administration that some employees and staff at these labs may have had coronavirus-like symptoms as early as October or September of 2019, continues to point to these labs as the origin of this virus, not that food market that the Chinese Communist Party used as a cover story from the very beginning. That's why it's so imperative that the Biden administration hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable and demand answers for all of these questions.
Yes, but you remember him saying that, according to this anti-Asian hate group, that's a hate crime, what he just said. It's also the truth, and we need more truth. We also probably need to revisit all the members of the media who denounced Cotton and the president and me and others for saying it probably came from that lab.
Honest news and conservative views.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. You can call in and be a part of this program should you like. 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Victoria Coates coming up at the bottom of the hour. Right now, let me go into a little more on this Wall Street Journal report that Tom Cotton and Marita Bartiromo were getting at. 3 researchers from China's Wuhan Institute of Virology became sick enough in November of 2019 that they sought hospital care, according to a recently undisclosed U.S. intelligence report that could add weight to growing calls for a fuller probe of whether the COVID-19 virus may have escaped from the lab. The details of the reporting go beyond a State Department fact sheet issued during the final days of the Trump administration, which said that several researchers at the lab, a center for the study of coronavirus and other pathogens, became sick in autumn of 2019 with symptoms consistent both with COVID-19 and common seasonal illness. The disclosure of the number of researchers, the timing of their illnesses, and their hospital visits come on the eve of a meeting of the World Health Organization's decision-making body, which is expected to discuss the next phase of an investigation into COVID. Current and former officials familiar with the intelligence about the lab researchers expressed differing views about the strength of the supported evidence of the assessment. One person said that it was provided by an international partner and was potentially significant, but still in need of further investigation and additional corroboration. Another person described the intelligence as stronger. The information that we had coming from the various sources was of exquisite quality. It was very precise. What it didn't tell you was exactly why they got sick. November 2019 is roughly when many epidemiologists and virologists believe SARS-CoV-2, the virus behind the pandemic, first began circulating around the central Chinese city of Wuhan, where Beijing said that the first confirmed case was a man who fell ill on December 8th, 2019. The Wuhan Institute hasn't shared raw data, safety logs, and lab records on its extensive work with coronaviruses in bats, which many consider the most likely source of the virus. China has repeatedly denied that the virus escaped from one of its labs. On Sunday, China's foreign ministry cited a World Health Organization-led team's conclusions after a visit to the Wuhan Institute in February that a lab leak was extremely unlikely. Do you believe the World Health Organization, particularly given what we know about their ties to China? How much of the prevailing international narrative was shaped by China? And by the way, this again makes me skeptical. We got all the UFO reports coming out. The Pentagon is about to release a report on UFOs very shortly. And one of the prevailing counter-arguments is it's not little green men, it's not aliens, it's not angels, it's not demons, it's the Chinese and Chinese technology. And I am very open to the idea, but in the back of my mind, I keep thinking for the last several decades, the Chinese have gotten ahead by stealing from everyone else, stealing intellectual property and technology. And every time the Chinese go it alone, they screw it up. So, for example, the Chinese built their first big nuclear aircraft carrier like 2 years ago and set it sail. It promptly caught fire. They've had several submarine instances where things didn't go well recently. Their infrastructure looks great, and then the bridges fall over and collapse. And now in the Wuhan lab, it looks like they possibly accidentally did release the coronavirus, and they've denied it. And it just seems to me that if the Chinese are capable of doing what they're doing, and it repeatedly breaks, then maybe the little green men is a greater explanation than Chinese technology theft being used for something else. We're going to find out about that report very soon. It's going to be interesting to see what the military says. My suspicion has been that it's more likely the Chinese or the Russians, but the Chinese never seem to get technology right when they do it themselves, which makes me wonder what's actually going on. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. To the phones, we're going to go to my friend Victoria Coates, who worked in the Trump administration and national security. How are you?
Eric, it's good to hear your voice. I'm very well.
So I want to talk to you. Okay, you know what? I'm going to throw a wild card at you before we get into the Israel Hamas thing, because we've got the UFO report coming out very soon. Everybody's talking about it. I just put this thread up on Twitter. So China, it seems to be the logical conclusion here is that it's got technology that is deployed, except the Chinese don't have a history of developing unique technologies. They steal from us and then half-ass it, if I can say that on my radio show, that their aircraft carrier, its maiden voyage caught on fire. Their high-speed rail line to Tibet, the bridge tipped over. Their major dam expansion down near Shanghai burst. They never seem to get stuff quite right, and I have a hard time believing they on their own have come up with some incredible technology. Maybe it is them. There's got to be a logical explanation, but the Chinese just aren't as great as the American media would have you believe.
No, and I think you raise an excellent point in the lights of the Wall Street Journal article that dropped overnight about the potential infection from the lab, the Wuhan lab. They don't have a history of being 100 feet high and perfectly executing these projects, rather that they can be extremely sloppy. And, a lot of countries around the world that have accepted their bids on various projects have learned this to their sorrow. So, whatever explanation there is for all the exciting photographs that are going around, and, we all hope maybe there are little green men that are about to pop out of one of the national labs. I will say that as a former employee of the Department of Energy, I never saw any evidence of it, but, here's hoping.
Yeah,
I definitely don't think it's China.
I just the American media seems to me when it comes to China, and it really you're right. This does tie so much into the Wuhan report. There's this fixation on the superiority of China. Tom Friedman, of course, I remember. I think I've told you the story. I was on a train with him one time where the porter actually picked up his plates because we were coming into Washington D.C. and he snapped at the guy about the inferior service, that this would never happen in China. He seems fixated on the superiority of China. That infects the American media, which I guess leads them, in addition to their Trump hatred, to never be able to acknowledge that, maybe this did slip out of a lab in China through carelessness or something.
Well, and I've been thinking since I read the journal piece, what if in the end, what brings down the PRC is, death by 1,000 lawsuits or by 1 billion lawsuits? What if this is the most significant man-made disaster literally in history, and everyone has a suit to bring for damages?
Yeah.
How do you survive that? What does that look like? And I think if this is proven to be true, we are in uncharted waters. Certainly, China's a large, powerful country with a lot of resources, but I don't know how they would be able to survive that when you have everyone from Exxon to the local pizza shop with a valid suit.
Right. And then, of course, you've got all the people from Chile and Sri Lanka and others who got the Chinese vaccine that doesn't appear to do a whole lot of good in containing the coronavirus. So, okay, let me shift gears with you now to the Israel Palestinian situation. I just a little while ago, before you came on, noted that the new talking point out there is the anti-Semitic and Islamophobic violence. And Axios has run a story on let me read it to you so I get it right. Vandalism and harassment fueled by anti-Semitism and Islamophobia has been reported to law enforcement and shared across social media platforms throughout the U.S. and Europe following 2 weeks of bombardments between the Israeli government and Hamas. Now, they list the anti-Semitic and the Islamophobic attacks, 4 of them. One is attacks on Jewish people in London. Another one is attacks on Jewish people in Times Square. Another one is attacks on Jewish people in Los Angeles. And another one is attacks on Jewish people in Chicago. And I can't find the Islamophobic attacks.
Well, I think you've really put your finger on it. It's this just compulsion to find an equivalence. And if you look at it, you'll see that the State Department spokesman, Ned Price, came out yesterday to foot stomp Secretary Blinken's statements on the Sunday shows about how both the Palestinians and the Israelis have an equal right to live in security and peace. And it's this idea of equivalence, that these two sides are equal, that is the root of the problem here. It's what the Abraham Accords gave the lie to last year, that they are no longer equal, if they ever were. That even UAE and Bahrain see the very obvious benefits of having a relationship with the modern nation state of Israel that the Palestinians simply have no claim over. And so, our media, the current administration, are frantically trying to stuff that genie back into the bottle. But there's no there. As you say, there are no Islamophobic attacks. There is only anti-Semitic violence.
Yeah, the moral equivalence on the left right now, and clearly Hawking points out, Chuck Schumer, Bernie Sanders, Ayanna Pressley, Cory Bush, multiple Democrats in Congress condemning anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in their tweets and public statements. Hard-pressed to actually find the Islamophobic attacks, but there clearly does seem to be a disproportionate disinformation campaign in the media in defense of Hamas and the Palestinian territory, including going to the bombing of the Hamas building that actually had the Associated Press and Al Jazeera inside the building. That, by the way, had been documented in the Atlantic years ago as the AP was in that building operated by Hamas, and suddenly broad denial. So I guess let me form this into a particular question for you. Having been in the Trump administration, having seen the peace deals that the Trump administration was able to think out of the box and get, and the media condemn them, I mean, how do you see the American media's coverage of the situation, and how can Israel navigate that coverage to actually get the truth out?
Well, it's a very dangerous situation, and what compounds it is it's being echoed by the Israeli press, which is also extremely biased toward the left, even though the left in Israel is in complete disarray. The media is echoing the U.S. echo chamber of shifting support for Israel, that the administration doesn't support Israel anymore, that the Congress is shifting in its support. I mean, really, you just have a couple of extremely media-savvy, loud individual voices in the form particularly of the Squad who, are trying to push this narrative. But if you scratch the surface, the vast majority of the American people support Israel. And it's not even close. And so you find, situations like, these votes that took place in the House last week on sanctioning Hamas and some other pro-Israel measures. And I bet those members, because all the Democrats voted against taking these actions, when those guys are back in their districts this week, I think they're going to get an earful because the numbers just don't play out. And I think it's a huge mistake and overreach on the part of the Democrats, which is being fueled, as you said, by the media.
Well, speaking of the Abraham Accords, I thought it was very notable that the Palestinians and Hamas got support from Pakistan, Malaysia, and Indonesia, but it was remarkable. Bahrain, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, largely quiet on the issue, which I guess shows John Kerry was wrong, that there can be separate pieces to be had.
No, I think that's very much the case, and I tracked all that very, very carefully throughout the 2 weeks of conflict, and the statements, particularly Sheikh Abdullah, the foreign minister for the UAE, was extremely measured in his statements. In some ways, he came out as more pro-Israel than the Biden administration did, which was quite a historic moment. So I think, history is marching on in the region and things are changing. And yet, this administration seems to be insisting on returning to the Kerry policies of, 10, 15 years ago. And that it's disconnected from reality. It's going to backfire on them. But it's certainly encouraging to see the Abraham Accords enduring, even, with the lack of support from the administration.
Now, let's shift a little bit and talk about Iran, because if you could, so many people, in fact, when I was growing up, tying Iran to Hezbollah was the thing, and it legitimate ties. But increasingly, it seems that there are ties to Hamas with Iran. And I guess that also raises the question of, where does Hamas get all the technology to build as many rockets as it is?
Oh, it's coming straight from Tehran, and nobody's even being subtle about it. And I think one thing that would be important for your listeners to know is Iran has funded Hamas to the tune of $70 million a year, which is has been hard for them to come up with, particularly with the sanctions regime the Trump administration imposed on them. Now, a week or so ago, a group of Hamas visited Tehran, and the announcement that came out of that visit was that they were going to up their contributions to $30 million a month. So they were going to go from $70 million a year to $360 million a year, which is, an exponential increase for a country which last month was reported to be down to its last $4 billion in foreign reserves. So, they are clearly anticipating a significant windfall from the negotiations that are going on in Vienna right now to get back in the nuclear deal, which would lift a lot of the sanctions. And they're telling us how they plan to spend that money, which is to send it to Hamas to restock them so they can attack Israel again. So, it is easy to cast blame at the administration, but the real blame lies with Iran. And, they are the ones who, because Hamas can't do anything indigenously. They don't have the technology, they don't have the resources, but they're getting it all directly from Iran. And they came out and thanked them. So, this isn't a secret in any way. But we apparently are trying to stovepipe it from the nuclear deal.
So let me just say, I would like your take on why do you think the Democrats, particularly the Obama administration, now the Biden administration, why do you think they're so insistent on cutting a deal with Iran?
Well, I think for them, the structure of the deal is almost more important than the deal itself. The approach of the Obama administration, which the Biden administration seems to be following as well, is that if the United States sort of curtails our ambitions and our interests for the sake of these international agreements and organizations, the world will be a better place. And I think they sincerely believe this. And so, if we are a little bit less arrogant, if we're a little bit less America first, maybe a lot less, we can get into these deals that will improve humanity. It's a little bit like the Paris Climate Accords. So the substance of the deal doesn't matter. The deal making is what matters. And so I think they are just convinced that, if they can get into this deal, and what they keep saying is it will lead to another better, stronger deal. This will be a process. But of course, the Iranians have a vote in all this, and they have said repeatedly they are not interested in any further deal. They will take the money that will come to them if the sanctions are lifted. And there's no reason to think they won't just wait out the deal, continue the research that they're doing on enrichment, nuclear enrichment, and when the deal expires in a couple of years, work on a weapon.
Yeah, the deal making for the sake of deal making. Well, listen, always insightful to talk to you. I appreciate you being able to stop by this morning to talk about it. What a wild time. I sure am glad you are in the ear of so many of the Republicans out there right now who desperately need some ways to try to counter what's going on.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I think, as I said, the good news is the American people support the alliance with Israel. They understand the significance of it. And, that support will endure, and that is good news.
That is. Victoria Coates, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Victoria Coates, she worked for the Trump White House in national security. She's advised Rick Perry, Ted Cruz, other Republicans, my friend Chip Roy down in Texas, and Victoria are friends. I know they talk. Brilliant with international policy, and an amazing person to be with. I'm just a Victoria Coates fan. Of course, we've been friends forever, but she has been in the National Security Council advising President Trump and Jared Kushner with the Abraham Accords and the like, so she knows what she's talking about. Always great to be able to get her on the phone to talk about this stuff.
You can follow Erick around social
Hello and welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. If you want to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You can always go to ewerickson.com. You can get my recipes there too. Friends, I keep hearing from y'all who have ordered the Eden Pure Thunderstorm air purifier, and everybody's liking it. I haven't heard any criticism. You can criticize if you want, and I will relay them back to Eden Pure HQ, but everybody loves it. I love it. We love it in our house. This air purifier, you can hold it in your hand, the Thunderstorm. It takes care of mold and mildew. It takes care of bacteria. It takes care of pollen. It's filterless. It wipes out odors. It doesn't mask odors. That's really important. Some air purifiers, and I got to use air quotes for this, they actually just mask the odor. The Eden Pure Thunderstorm actually eliminates the odor. So you can use it in your kitchen. You can use it in your car. Wherever it works. And right now you can get 3 of them for $187, saving you $200. Normally to get 3, it's $387. But if you go to EdenPureDeals.com and you click on my name, you'll see you get 3 of them. And it'll say $387. But wait! When you go through the checkout process, you'll get a discount code bar. And in the discount code bar or block, you put my name, ERICK. And when you do that, miracle of miracles, it takes $200 off. So you get 3 of these suckers for $187, $200 off, and you get free shipping. It's a heck of a deal. Have one in your bedroom, one in your RV, one in your kitchen, your back porch, wherever you need them. The Eden Pure Thunderstorm, they work tremendously well. So go to EdenPureDeals.com. Eden, like the Garden of Eden. Pure is in the driven snow. EdenPureDeals.com. And then when you check out, and the discount code is my name, Erick, ERICK, you will save $200. You'll get free shipping. You'll get 3 of these bad boys, and they really work. In fact, I fried shrimp, and they work for that. Although yesterday I fried shrimp outside on my grill. I did a very good job with my fried shrimp. I made fried shrimp tacos. We had a minor celebration last night, 1, I could breathe again, and 2, have news for you guys coming up, and they were good. I'm going to have to put up my fried shrimp recipe, I suspect, because, oh, man, it was good fried shrimp. All right, we got other stuff we got to talk about. This story right here, I laugh. I really do have to laugh at this. Melting ice in Antarctica could trigger chain reactions, bringing monsoon rains to the ice cap, study says. In an ever-warming climate, ripple effects or chain reactions could lead to altered weather patterns across the globe thanks to a melting Antarctic ice shelf, a new study says. The study, published in the journal Nature Geoscience, found that as Earth continues to heat up, the land underneath the Antarctic ice shelf will become more exposed. As a result of that process, wind patterns will shift and rainfall will increase, which could trigger processes that speed up ice loss. We found that ice sheet retreat, exposing previously ice-covered land, led to big increases in rainfall, which through a feedback mechanism dramatically warms the ocean. The feedback mechanism could potentially trigger additional processes that accelerate ice loss. The joint study is based on combining climate modeling and data comparisons from the middle Mesolcene epoch, 13 to 17 million years ago. Y'all know Greta Thunberg, you must take her seriously or she will scowl at you. Greta Thunberg is out telling you that your healthcare crisis is related to climate change, and the crisis of the poor is related to climate change. Now, I wonder if she has opinions on giving all of the poor people in Africa air conditioners, because I assure you this is one of the dirty little secrets of environmentalism. They want comfort for the West and not for anyone else. Because if you were to give every African an air conditioner, it would be bad for the environment. So they don't want to do that. I mean, if you sprayed DDT in Africa, you could wipe out the malaria problem. But we're not allowed to do that because even low-dose DDT is supposedly terrible for you. So the Africans, the poor people in Africa, must sleep under nets to avoid getting malaria. The whole thing is environmentalism. Listen, everyone should to some degree be an environmentalist because the good Lord gave us the planet and told us to be stewards of it, and we're supposed to be good stewards of the planet, and I think that includes some responsibility for stewarding the resources of the planet. But we should separate the stewardship of the planet from worship of the planet, and so much of environmentalism these days is 100% worship of the planet. It is cult-like, and every single issue on planet Earth is tied into environmentalism. It's a rather bizarre scenario now where you can't really get a lot of accurate reporting from the media because the media has gone down the environmentalist cult rabbit hole. And every single problem on the planet now, from racism to poverty to women's health care, you name it, it's all part of climate change. Greta Thunberg is out who wants you, and she wants you to know all these problems are interconnected, and she's very scowly about it, and so you better be scowly too, because we're all going to die here any moment. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number, if you would like to be on the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. So great to have you with me, and we need to talk about the George Soros crime wave. Now, let me begin. George Soros has backed a number of district attorneys around the country. Now, you're not allowed to talk about George Soros anymore because if you do, you're immediately accused of anti-Semitism from the American media. But you need to hear this. This is from Politico in 2016. While America's political kingmakers inject their millions into high-profile presidential and congressional contests, Democratic mega-donor George Soros has directed his wealth into an under-the-radar 2016 campaign to advance one of the progressive movement's core goals, reshaping the American justice system. The billionaire financier has channeled more than $3 million into 7 local district attorney campaigns in 6 states over the past year, a sum that exceeds the total spent on the 2016 presidential campaign by all but a handful of rival superdonors. His money has supported African American and Hispanic candidates for these powerful local roles, all of whom ran on platforms sharing major goals of Soros's, like reducing racial disparities in sentencing and directing some drug offenders to diversion programs instead of trial. It is by far the most tangible action in a progressive push to find, prepare, and finance criminal justice reform-oriented candidates for jobs that have been held by longtime incumbents and serve as pipelines to the federal courts. And it has inspired fury among opponents angry about the outside influence in local elections. The prosecutor exercises the greatest discretion and power in the system. It is so important, says Andrea Dew Steele, president of Emerge America, a candidate training organization for Democratic women. There's been a confluence of events in the past couple of years, and all of a sudden, the progressive community is waking up to this. Soros has spent on district attorney campaigns in Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Texas through a network of state-level super PACs and a national 527 unlimited money group, each named a variation on safety and justice. Soros has also funded a federal super PAC with the same name. Each organization received most of its money directly from Soros, according to public, state, and federal financial records, though some groups also got donations from nonprofits like Civic Participation Action Fund, which gave the Safety and Justice Group in Illinois. The Florida Safety and Justice Group just poured nearly $1.4 million, all of which came from Soros and his 527 group, into a previously low-budget Democratic primary for state attorney in Central Florida before Tuesday's vote. The group is backing Arama Sayala, a former public defender and prosecutor, in her campaign against incumbent Jeff Ashton, whose jurisdiction covers over 1.6 million people across 2 counties in Metro Orlando. Now, this has been going on since 2016. It is a pattern. It is expanded beyond these states. And part of the problem is that it worked in small races of limited funding. For example, Rama Sayala in Florida got elected, and now she's considering running for the Senate. She is an American prosecutor and state attorney in the Ninth Judicial Circuit in Florida. Yes. In May of 2019, she stated she would not seek re-election as a state attorney. Interestingly enough, this has come to a head in places like San Francisco, but it's not just San Francisco, it's around the country. In San Francisco right now, drug overdoses killed twice as many people as COVID, with 2021 on track to be even worse. And San Francisco is now presided over from a law and order standpoint by, what's his name? The district attorney out there who's facing a recall. He's the godson of the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers terrorist guy. And he's one of the people that George Soros backed. Let me read you this from Thomas Fuller. He's writing in the New York Times, the California Today column. Soon after moving to San Francisco in 2016, I walked into a Walgreens in North Beach to buy an electric toothbrush. As I was paying for it, a man walked into the store, grabbed a handful of beef jerky, and walked out. I looked over at an employee who shrugged. Then I went to Safeway next door for some groceries and saw a man stuffing 3 bottles of wine into a backpack and walking casually towards the exit. On his way out, he bagged some snacks. I asked the Safeway clerk about the thefts. I'm new to San Francisco, I said. Is it optional to pay for things here? 5 years later, the shoplifting epidemic in San Francisco has only worsened. At a Board of Supervisors hearing last week, representatives from Walgreens said that thefts at its stores in San Francisco were 4 times the chain's national average, and that it had closed 17 stores, largely because the scale of thefts had made business untenable. Brendan Dugan, the director of the Retail Crime Division at CVS, called San Francisco one of the epicenters of organized retail crime and said employees were instructed not to pursue suspected thieves because encounters could become dangerous. We've had incidents where our security officers were assaulted on a pretty regular basis in San Francisco. The retail executives and police officers emphasized the role of organized crime in the thefts. They told supervisors that Proposition 47, the 2014 ballot measure that reclassified nonviolent thefts as misdemeanors if the stolen goods are less than $950, has emboldened thieves. The one trend we are seeing is more violence and escalation, everyone being more bold, said Commander Raj Vaswani, the head of the Investigations Bureau at the San Francisco Police Department. San Francisco has suffered in a variety of ways during the pandemic. The city had twice as many fatal drug overdoses as coronavirus deaths. Tens of legions of homeless people lined sidewalks during the lockdown, but the hearing last week focused on something more prosaic. One of the richest cities in America is struggling with sticky fingers. It just seems to be a way of life out there, but it's gotten worse now. The George Soros-backed district attorney in San Francisco, after a spate of anti-Asian violence conducted by young black men, actual abuse of Asian Americans in San Francisco, decided not to charge them. Decided not to charge the perpetrators. In the metro Atlanta area, there have been prosecutors who have decided they're no longer going to prosecute petty crimes, including possession of marijuana. Several of them are Soros-backed. The same is true across the nation with Soros-backed district attorneys who have decided to go so soft on crime that crime waves have started. I live in Bibb County, Macon, Georgia, the middle of Georgia. As he said, this is from the local Macon Telegraph newspaper. As he sentenced a convicted killer the other day, a Bibb County judge mentioned the area's scourge of gun violence and offered words of warning to those responsible. Judge Howard Sims, a former prosecutor known for stern yet homespun lectures from the bench that offer equal parts wisdom and admonishment to the guilty, said that with the coronavirus pandemic subsiding, the country's highest court was back in business. The scene that played out there last Thursday evening offered a small window into the deep wounds and consequences that a wave of violence has unleashed in middle Georgia. Since the beginning of 2016, there have been around 190 homicides in the county, roughly a third of them during COVID-19. This year, or the year 2020, saw a modern-day high, 51 slayings countywide. The shooting death of Michael Chapman has been the country's 31st homicide of 2018, and last week his accuser went on trial. Referring later to the toll inflicted by the county's record bloodshed, Bibb County District Attorney Anita Howard would, in an interview with the Telegraph, say she does not take lightly the job her office faces. We have folks who are wreaking havoc on this community. I live by, and the folks in this office know that Proverbs 21:15, and that says that when justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. She said that in her mind, the judge's sentencing of DeQuavius Howard spoke directly to that verse. In court last Thursday evening, after Howard said no, sir, when asked if he had anything to say, Sims gestured to his right to the rear of the courtroom where Howard's family sat. The group of a dozen or so relatives had been in court for much of the testimony. Some were sobbing. I want you to remember for the rest of your life how everybody on that side of the room is feeling right now, the judge told Howard. Mr. Chapman's family will never see him again. Your family will never see you again outside of prison. There's a growing crime wave in Middle Georgia, in metropolitan Atlanta, in Dallas, Texas, in Houston, Texas, in Chicago, Illinois, in San Francisco, California, Los Angeles, California, in New York City. A lot of it because progressive district attorneys, encouraged by and funded by men like George Soros, got elected in sleepy, low-dollar campaigns, and they changed the way law enforcement is done and sparked a crime wave. And now the left is paying attention. Ezra Klein, now at the New York Times, listen to this. This is a Twitter thread from Ezra Klein. Violent crime is spiking. Homicides in cities were up by 25 to 40% in 2020, the largest single-year increase since 1960. And 2021 isn't looking any better. This is a crisis on its own terms, but it's also a crisis for the broader liberal project in two downstream ways. First, violent crimes supercharge inequality. Families who can flee do. Businesses close or never open. Banks won't make loans. Property values plummet. Children are traumatized with lifelong impacts on stress and cognition. Second, fear of violence undermines liberal politics. Just look at America post 9/11. Or after the crime surges of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, strong men politicians win. Punitive responses like mass incarceration and warrior policing rise. Social trust collapses. We're not there yet. Larry Krasner survived his primary challenge in Philadelphia, but we're seeing other signs. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms isn't running for re-election after being attacked by challengers as soft on crime. Chiza Boudin, he's the San Francisco district attorney. You notice he mentioned Krasner in Philadelphia, also a Soros-funded guy, I believe. The DA in San Francisco is facing a recall effort. Violence is the second most important issue to Democrats in the New York City mayoral primary, behind coronavirus, ahead of housing affordability and racial inequality. The policies of this could really tip, and not just in cities. If the numbers get worse, then as with Nixon and Reagan in the 70s and 80s, it could bring law and order conservatives, including Trump, back to power in 2024. More than that, crime should be an issue liberals focus on eagerly. People deserve to be safe from crime and safe from state violence. That's foundational to a good life. Too often, they're given a choice between one or the other, and it's often a false choice at that. You get this. You get what's going on here is the left is concerned about the crime wave, not because of crime, but because the right might win. So George Soros, starting in 2016, helped fund a wave of highly progressive district attorneys to take over. Those district attorneys, in many cases, won because they're small dollar races where Soros flooded the zone. His progressive DAs won. They got soft on crime. Crime waves broke out, and now suddenly they're like, wait a second, guys. This could help the Republicans. We may need to rethink this thing. Is it not remarkable? They're not concerned about a crime wave per se. They're concerned about Republicans being able to take advantage of the crime wave and get law and order Republicans elected in response. Think how clever they were. They convinced a billionaire to fund a bunch of progressive district attorneys around the country. They win, and now the consequences of their elections are Republicans may get elected in response because their policies, it turns out, not only didn't keep people safe, but set off crime waves. And the response is not, well, maybe we shouldn't be electing progressive DAs who are soft on crime. No, the response is, oh my gosh, Republicans could pounce. Republicans could seize on it and pounce and then bounce in the polls. Oh my goodness, this is terrible. Not because the people are dying or homes are getting broken into, but Republicans are on the rise because of it. Never underestimate a progressive's willingness to freak out at the idea of Republicans getting power because of progressive policies. But it's never the progressive policies that are the problem. It's Republicans seizing on those policies. That's the problem.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Erick